Richard. Will give the ball to McClendon. He leaps. Oh! He doesn't get in. He fumbled the football. Carolina holds. The game is over. And Carolina has won the game.
With 5 seconds, he's going to throw it. Howard leaps. He has it. Touchdown. Carolina back from the dead to tie the game with 2 seconds to go. There is a flag down, but holy smokes.
2 and 4 in overtime games. Carolina 1 and 3. Here from under center. Give off to Greg Little. Little pulls away. Little is going to score. Carolina wins.
Snap back, spot down. The kick is cleanly away. It is good!
And it's
with
yes,
a 54-yard field goal. And how about them Tar Heels? They do it!
Possible win. Snap, spot, kick away, high enough, long enough. It's good! It's good! Carolina has won the game on a 42-yard field goal by freshman Connor Barnes.
In his end zone. The punt, very high. Switzer will have room to return it. He fields it at the 40. Coming near side, Switzer at the 50. Switzer, 45, cuts back at the 40. 35, breaks a tackle at the 30. Still on his feet. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Ryan Switzer for 6. He is doing his best Giovanni Bernard impression. Ryan Switzer again. Bernard fields it at the 26. Heading to the far side. Gio at the 35. Gio, he's at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Gio is going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me?
What's going on, guys? Welcome into another edition of the Heel Tough Blog Podcast with you on a Wednesday night. A little midweek action, and believe it or not, we're going to actually go 2 times over the next 2 days. So it's going to be coming at you fast and furious here. We had to separate it originally, as I told you on the last edition of the podcast. We were going to do the skill position players on the offensive side of the ball, but we had the preseason ACC poll released today. We had Matt Brown speak after the first press conference. Also, want to give my takeaways. There was a video that was released by Inside Carolina, which showed us a lot of team snaps from the first night of fall camp. And you got to look at the 3 quarterbacks. I think there was some interesting stuff that you could take away from that. So I'll let you know what I thought of that. And then, of course, we do end up having to get to one of those position groups, which we will focus on the running backs, which, believe it or not, there's a little bit more to the running back room than you probably realize. It's not just Amarian Hampton. There's some questions behind him, and there's some questions even with Amarian Hampton and what type of season could be in store for him. Josh Marlowe alongside with me here as, again, this time of the year, pretty much going to be me and him doing just about every podcast. So it's going to be a lot of fun. We had an opportunity to go to a soccer game tonight, and we turned that down, guys, because we want to be here with you doing this. So extremely excited about all the stuff coming up here on this edition of the podcast. But as I mentioned, the 2024 ACC preseason poll released earlier today. I'll tell you, the ACC is really dragging it out this year. It felt like in years past, we were well past the point of knowing where Carolina was picked to finish in the preseason, who was the ACC preseason player of the year, and the all-ACC teams. They are dragging it out. So today, you ended up getting the preseason poll 1 through 17. Again, it is a little bit different than it's been in years past, of course, because, you do have the elimination of divisions, and, it is basically there's so many different tiers now to the ACC. And so Carolina gets picked to finish 8th in the ACC. I got to be honest, I don't think anybody should really be all that shocked This is kind of where, if you were reading the preseason magazines, this was the range that Carolina was in, 7th, 8th, 9th. And I don't think that you should really be stunned because there's no answer at quarterback right now. There are still questions about the defensive side of the ball. There is hope, but still questions about the offensive line. And then there's a lot of positivity. You have a great running back who we'll talk more extensively about later. Your skill positions, for the most part, outside of running back, are in really good shape as well at receiver and tight end. Then you go over to the defensive side of the ball, and there's excitement in the secondary. The linebacking core is solid. So there's reasons why you still feel like Carolina is in the middle of the pack here. But what did you make of it, buddy, that Carolina ends up 8th in the preseason ACC poll?
Man, no, it made a lot of sense. I think if we had a definite answer at quarterback, maybe they're a spot or two higher because there are other answers on the roster that you know about, mainly your running back who is, if not the best running back in the sport, is the second best running back in the sport. So not surprised. I think what's really more interesting was just maybe some of the other stuff that came out of it, where they didn't get a first place vote, but you saw schools like Georgia Tech, Cal, Boston College somehow earn first place votes in the preseason poll. Very well could have been an accident, could have been a guy trolling, but it's where Carolina should be, and I think when Mac Brown would have seen that today, he would have smiled and said, "That's good," because I think he spent a lot of time this offseason, tempering expectations and really trying to, I think, put a chip on this team's shoulder to really find another way to motivate them outside of just the losing streaks to end the season. That's going to be the big talking point. But now you can walk in there and say, see, they don't believe in you. They think you're the 8th best team in the country or the 8th best team in the conference, and you're not worthy of a first place vote, while X, Y, and Z teams got a first place vote. So not surprised. And as we get closer to the season, I feel better about this team. And I think when we get, to December, not saying Carolina's going to be playing in Charlotte, I do think they will finish higher than their preseason expectation.
Yeah, I mean, look, nobody should be shocked by this because there are a lot of really solid teams. I mean, when you look at it, in the preseason, I would say you have at least 4 that I think most people believe can get to the ACC championship game. I think maybe there are some people. 5, I guess you could also be at in terms of teams that you think, if you're that high on Virginia Tech or NC State, Miami. Those are the teams that I think are the wild cards. But Carolina, I honestly feel like, to me, and tell me if I'm wrong on this, I think that there are 3 that there are. Well, there's multiple tiers, but Carolina's in the 3rd tier to me in the ACC. I think Clemson and Florida State I would probably put in tier 1 right now. Even with Florida State having DJU, I think they're still a good enough all-around team in terms of their talent to probably be up there in that 1st tier. Tier 2, I've let's see, Virginia Tech, NC State, Miami in that tier. And then I think Carolina's in that 3rd tier, probably with teams like Louisville, SMU, and I have Georgia Tech in that same tier as Carolina. Is that kind of how you see it too? And should Tar Heel fans be okay with the fact that they're being lumped in with those teams?
Yeah, I think they're in the 3rd tier. I would tier them differently. I would put NC State in tier 1. I think they're poised to have a fantastic season. I picked them to make the ACC championship game when I filled out my preseason ballot. And I would put SMU in tier 2. They won 11 games a year ago. You're returning your quarterback. You get some of your marquee ACC games at home. I love that Florida State game. Again, I think SMU will actually win in the regular season. So, but then, Carolina sits third. But I think if Carolina gets the answer at quarterback like Mac Brown wants to, and we'll get to that in just a minute, I think Carolina could play themselves into that second tier because they've got a schedule that is manageable. Now, granted, you got to win those games, and that's been the biggest issue with this program really since its inception. But if you get the answer at quarterback, you get that win at Minnesota, I think we'll have another 5-0 football team we're talking about in October, and Carolina would then thrust themselves in the conversation as some sort of a contender to make the ACC championship game. So it's right for them to be a tier 3 team right now. But if they get the answer at quarterback and the defense takes some sort of a step forward, there's a pathway to you seeing them being a second-tier team in this conference. And that's not a bad thing. I know the joke about the ACC is that, yes, historically it's a basketball conference. And there's no denying that the SEC and the Big Ten are better conferences. But the ACC, I think this year is going to be really, really good. I think it'll be the third best conference in college football. So if Carolina finds themselves as a second-tier team in the ACC, we could be talking about an 8-9 win football team.
Yeah, I mean, and look, it all comes down to the quarterbacks, I think, for the ACC. I think that's the reason why this conference is going to be so deep this year. To me, I mean, some of the teams that you mentioned, like SMU, to me, it's you're going from the AAC to the ACC. It's definitely a step up. That's why I'd put them in tier 3. And NC State, it's really just program history for me. They're a program that has 2 double-digit win seasons still. So they've had expectations before, and they've fallen short. So that's why I put them where I put them. In terms of them not receiving a first-place vote, I mean, look, Florida State, Clemson, Miami, NC State, and even Georgia Tech, I understand the people that would see a path for those teams to, I guess, in that case, win the ACC. Now, Georgia Tech winning the ACC, maybe a bit much. I could see someone believing in them that much that they put them in the ACC title game, really, because I'm with them in terms of just loving everything that I've seen from Haynes King. Cal and Boston College, those are complete homer picks. There is no way that anybody actually believes that those teams will come close. To me, I mean, a lot of people were roasting the Boston College pick. I can't believe Cal is up there. I have Cal finishing 14th in the conference. So, there is no way in hell that Cal is even coming close to making it to the ACC title game. Boston College probably won't either, but I see that one to me makes a little more sense. I can't lie, and you'll find out probably when we talk tomorrow that there were certain things that I did that people would probably look at and frown upon because, yeah, I mean, there's a team in this conference that I do not like, and I did not pick a single one of their players in the preseason All-ACC. Didn't do it. So, but, I mean, to really think that Cal and Boston College can make it there, and I mean, when I ranked the teams in the conference, I took bias out of it and just really thought, okay, this is how I see it shaping out. That was certainly interesting. All right, so here's the thing. Where do you have Carolina finishing in the conference on your ACC ballot? Were you one of the reasons that they were as low as they were? Were you maybe a little higher on them? Where did they end up finishing?
No, I had them 8th. That's exactly where I had them because when I filled out my ballot, I think I did mine late Sunday night. I didn't know who my quarterback was. And so, when you look at some of these games that I think are going to really dictate where Carolina finishes, not knowing the quarterback makes it harder to pick some of those games. And so I have them 8th, but again, I don't think that's a bad thing. And I didn't feel I didn't feel guilty because I think last year when I filled out my ballot, I think I had Carolina finishing third. I don't think I had them returning to Charlotte to the AC title game. And there was some guilt there because that was the expectation. And I think we all thought it was very much possible. This year, I put them 8th. I didn't feel bad about it. And like I said earlier, I do think they will finish above their preseason expectation.
Yeah, I put them 7th. So I don't know the teams that you had in front of them. I'll reel them off real quick here. I had Clemson 1, Florida State 2, Virginia Tech 3, NC State 4th, Georgia Tech 5th, Miami 6th, and then Carolina 7th. I leaned Carolina over Louisville, SMU, Boston College, Syracuse, and then I have them pretty clear of Duke, Pittsburgh, Cal, Virginia, Wake Forest, and Stanford. Again, I'm slightly higher than some of the other people. I think there were probably people that had them 9th. I don't think, honestly, I would be stunned if many people had them outside of the top 10. I think most people believe that they will be a top 10 team, which would mean a bowl team. I think at 7th, they're probably a team that ends up winning 8 games at least, and probably finishes, in my mind, the conference record, if you're 7th, is 5-3. I think tiebreakers might be the reason why certain teams are ahead of them, especially when you get into that 5-6 range. But yeah, I mean, I feel like there is an opportunity. I could probably see Carolina climbing as high as 4th this year. I don't know if I can see them climbing higher than that. I mean, look, I'd love to believe it, especially if they can get off to as good of a start. Like if they get off to the type of start that we heard Phil Steele tell us, 7-1, 8-0, maybe then you can start dreaming a little bit of being a team that if enough things go wrong at the top of the conference, maybe they get back to Charlotte or finish 3rd in the conference. But I think, to me, the range for them is probably 4th, anywhere down to 10th. Are you with me on that?
Yeah, I mean, if they finish 10th, I think disappointment, I think, would be an understatement. Unless just something happened where you have a numerous amount of injuries and they just get depleted.
But if they're 10th, I mean, let's say they're 7-5, 4-4. Like, are we devastated about that? I don't know. I couldn't say I'm devastated.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be one about, how does it look? Did you lose again to a team you shouldn't lose to? Is it that type of thing? I think their ceiling, I think they could get as high as 3. But that's with you having to win at least 1, if not 2 games, I think, on the schedule you look at as losses, which is at Florida State and then the finale at home against NC State because, A, I think State's better, and B, what have we done the last 2 years that would invoke confidence that we could beat them? Yep. If you split those games, I think there's a scenario where you can climb as high as 3 if you eliminate some of the losses that you have had in recent years. So I think that's the thing about this season. And like when I put the article out, like there's a lot of unknown about this team. I think it's why they're going to be one of the more, I think, intriguing teams to watch in the conference this year because there's talent up and down the roster. They've recruited well since Mac Brown got back here to where if they're playing meaningful games in November, you're not going to be surprised. There's also a situation where this thing just flies off the handle and they're just a team and we're just trying to get to bowl season to maybe talk about a new head coach. So, but I would go, I think they could get as high as 3. I'd be as shocked if they fell below 8th, but that's just me.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible, but I do think there's a lot of similarities. I mean, first of all, Louisville, and I don't know, who do you have in front of Carolina in yours?
I had everybody you had, and then I had SMU.
Okay. Louisville is the other one because, I mean, their schedule is, I mean, cake is, I mean, putting it lightly. They're
Same thing as last year.
Yeah, I mean, so that's the thing. And then Boston College is intriguing because I just really don't know what to make of Bill O'Brien. If it was still Jeff Hafley, I mean, they would probably be in the same range as, like, I would think they would maybe be in contention to be a team that could surprise, maybe finish as high as 6, something like that. So that's the thing. That's why I could see him getting down to 10th. But again, that would be me seeing them finish 7-5 and like 4-4 in conference, which would be my floor for them at this point. I mean, if they go any lower than that, like if they're struggling, if it comes down to the last week and they need that win to get into a bowl game, that would just be absolutely stunning to me. I think there's too much talent across the board on this roster. All right, guys. Well, we've told you a little bit about the ACC preseason poll. Now let's get into the start of fall camp. And look, Mack Brown spoke afterwards on Monday. We'll talk about that here in just a second, some of the stuff that he pointed out. But I wanted to just tell you what I saw from the video that Inside Carolina put up. A good amount of snaps that they were able to show during the team session, 11 on 11. You got to see all 3 quarterbacks. I will say one of the first things that's very notable, Jacoby Criswell did not take really any snaps with the ones that I could see. That pretty much shows you that I think we kind of have our answer there. Unless the other 2 guys really struggle that much and he just looks that great, I don't see a way where he's going to be in contention to be the starter, or even really in contention to be a part of the rotation if they go with 2 guys when they get to that game against Minnesota. I've come to the conclusion now that I think where it probably is at for him is he's a guy that's going to come in. He's using fall camp to sort of learn the system and everything like that. And he's a guy that'll be waiting in the wings. And if they go with one quarterback, that quarterback ends up struggling, and they really like what they're seeing from Criswell in practice, and they think that he has a good enough understanding of the playbook, he may be the guy that they go to in the middle of the season, because I think he's the most talented of this group. I definitely think he has the best arm of this group. But I think the arrival time is really the reason why he is not a serious contender. Now, when it came to the actual quarterbacks and how they played, I thought Criswell was okay. Little shaky. You could tell that it was his first day back and stuff like that. He did fumble one snap, picked it up. I think it was off to his left a little bit, but he did show the arm talent. There were a couple of really nice throws where you could just see the arm strength was very clear. And then the other 2 quarterbacks, I thought Max Johnson was easily the better of the 2. Connor Harrell missed some throws on the first day. And look, it's going to happen. There's no doubt about it. But yeah, every practice is important at this point. And I thought Max Johnson probably won that first practice based off of what we saw there. Again, they're going for almost 2 hours. So not sure how long of a period of time it was. Inside Carolina did a great job of cutting out all the stuff in between. So you got to look at a lot of plays. So have to think that was a pretty decent portion of what they did team-wise. They probably did a little bit of 7-on-7, which we didn't get to see. So maybe there were some throws in there for Harrell. But I like the way that Max Johnson looked, and I think that he probably won that day. Now, of course, they did practice last night. I believe they are practicing as we speak right now tonight, but I'm not sure about that. They may actually be waiting until tomorrow. So few days in, still hard to tell. But, that's just basically what I saw from that video. And look, let's transition right into the quarterback. And there were 2 things that Mack Brown brought up. They were separate, but they were very interesting. He first said about the quarterback spot that he wanted to find out how they were going to divvy up the reps within the first 10 days of camp, which I think is the perfect amount of time to determine what you are going to do in terms of first team reps, who's going to take the majority of them, because you need to get those guys comfortable with whoever is going to be their quarterback. So he's setting that deadline there. That'll be the point where we'll kind of know who's sort of starting to edge ahead in this race. And again, I think it's 2 guys, but we'll have to just wait and see. And then the other thing that he said, and we've heard this every single time that Carolina's had a quarterback battle since he's returned, so twice, is that he wants to have his starter by around 10 days before the opener. He did that with Sam Howell. He stuck to that. With Drake May, he waited a little bit longer. And with this one, I don't know. I find it hard to believe that he is going to be able to stick to that, especially if the guys are as close as we heard they were exiting spring and heading into the start of fall camp.
Yeah, to me, that felt like an answer almost to maybe appease the fan base and give us maybe something to talk about, because he knows that there are guys like us that do podcasts that are going to talk about this and be like, hey, we got news. Carolina's going to have their quarterback 10 days before they go to Minnesota. I don't believe that for a single second. I fully expect 2 quarterbacks to play in that game unless it's just clear and obvious that one or the other emerges as the guy. I don't think that's going to happen. As competitive as these 2 guys are, I think it'll be something where it's going to be back and forth all season or all preseason long. So, I thought it was interesting because, I remember the whole 10-day out thing, and we knew about it with Sam. We knew with Drake, I think he told him the Sunday of game week. Maybe it was that Monday that he was the starter. And of course, they were playing an FCS opponent, so it wasn't as imperative because you weren't going on the road against a Power 5 opponent.
Also played week 0 too, so that timeline may have got shifted a little bit by that.
Yeah. So, but I think it'll be interesting to see when we get to August 28th or August 18th or 19th. Do we have an answer? Are we close to having an answer who's going to be the signal caller? So I think the answer is no, but who knows? He may up and surprise us and tell us 20 days before the opener, hey, we got our quarterback.
Well, I think what it was he was basically telling you what he hopes happens, because I truly believe that's what he hopes happens. I don't think he's a guy that's going to want to run 2 quarterbacks. If I remember correctly, when he was talking about that idea with Criswell and Drake, he said that he had tried it at Texas, I want to say, and it did not work out, and he did not want to do that. So, look, I think that's probably – that's honestly, I think, how he feels. I think he wants there to be a guy with 10 days to go. But I believe that if he can't find that much of a difference between them, mainly if the offensive staff still feels like, hey, we need to see more, then – look, the timeline will be extended. This is not a hard deadline where on that day he's going to sit down and say, look, either we pick a starter or we're not playing in week 1. That's not how it's going to go down. But I think, he's telling the truth, man. He wants to have one guy settled by then, because then that allows them to, as he said, meet with the media, get comfortable with doing that. But most importantly, it allows them to then be the guy that when they are game planning specifically for Minnesota, that is the guy that's running with the first team. They're building that reputation together, and it allows them to succeed in some of the things that they want to do. So hopefully that's how it ends up working out. But I'm just skeptical because we didn't have any separation really between the 2 that I think are in the race back in the spring. It's the same guys. There's going to be ups and downs you'd expect again, and I just don't know if they're going to be able to separate themselves really that much. Well, another thing that he talked about was his future in coaching. And this is not shocking if you listen to him talking on the stand the other night or the other afternoon at ACC Media Days. Look, man, I think honestly, you know, he brings up the example of Joe Paterno, of Bobby Bowden, guys that said, look, when I step away, that'll be it. I mean, he gives the quote of Bobby Bowden saying the next important thing in my life that will happen is my burial. I think that shows you that he's a guy that he is a football man. His life is football. Yes, he loves his family. There's a reason why when he left Texas, he did, and he spent time away. He was on television still talking football, but the majority of the year he was with his family. This is where he wants to be, is coaching on the sidelines or in some way at least involved with the world of college football. And I think the most interesting thing that he said was that he wanted to navigate Carolina through this time period that we're going through. He said that the goal when he came back was to make Carolina relevant again. And he's done that. He said that with all the uncertainty around what's going on with NIL, all that kind of stuff, I think he's looking at it as, if I can get the program through this time and get it to a more stable time period, then I'll feel happy about where the program is at. And then I can let it go to somebody else and move on, either to, at that time, if it's 5-10 years down the line, then officially retire, or potentially move into some sort of like overseer role, a guy that is part of the committee of college football and sort of helps to further the sport moving forward. What did you take away from that?
Well, I mean, the biggest thing was that he said he doesn't want to leave even if it becomes a mess. And so that, to me, that really stood out, because if this season turns into a disaster, is this going to be a guy that's going to push back on being moved on from? And like, does a divorce get ugly? I don't want that to happen. Like, I want, whenever his time is done, it's him riding off into the sunset, and he made us relevant again. He's navigated us through a tumultuous time of college athletics during the era of the portal, NIL, and conference realignment, really changing the sport overnight. And so I think that was interesting, is that that was kind of a little Roy Williams-esque, where Roy Williams always talked about, like, he was never going to leave the program in a bad spot, and he was true to his word, because the very next year the team went and played for a national championship. I'm not saying that's what Mac Brown's going to do, but I think he, because he knows how hard it can be to win at Carolina, he doesn't want to set the next coach up for failure. But we know how these things work. If it doesn't go right, the same boosters that brought him back will get the money to get rid of him if that's what they want to do. And does it become a public, divorce that turns messy? I don't want that to happen. I don't think it's going to happen, because, for all of his shortcomings that he has, whether it's been with us or at Texas, the guy wins more football games than he loses.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just the facts. Yes, he has maybe some of the most dumbfounding losses of any coach in college football history, between his stops here and his stops at Texas. But more often than not, his teams win. More often than not, his fan base is happy with him. They're never really looking for a reason to fire him. So I think it's going to be interesting, though, because he said he doesn't want to leave if the program is in a messy situation, whether it's on or off the field. So we'll see what that looks like, because the portal hasn't been, isn't slowing down. NIL doesn't have the regulation that it still needs. And conference realignment is still looming. And I do think at some point Carolina's going to make their move. Does he see the program through that transition when they step up to the Big Ten or the SEC in the years to come? So that's what I thought was interesting, because there's a lot of unknown around the ACC football programs, and Carolina is one of the big dominoes in all of that.
Well, if he's waiting for that, it could be a while. I mean, again, Carolina hasn't even done what Clemson and Florida State have done, which is sue the conference. So it could be a while before that happens. I did think one of the interesting things when he was talking about NIL, he said about one of the lawsuits, and at this point, it's impossible to keep up with which one he's actually talking about, and that it eventually could, he thinks within the next few years, lead to some sort of system where you have a limited amount of money and it basically forms a salary cap. If that happens, that's the moment that I think he's trying to get to. Because at that rate, I mean, you look at what Carolina's doing on the recruiting trail now. The reason that they're struggling to bring guys in is because guys in the state of North Carolina, this is a top 10 state, maybe even top 5 at this point, in terms of just pure high school football talent across the board. And teams are coming in here paying a significant amount of money to these guys and pulling them out of the state. So that's one of the big reasons why Carolina is struggling. That's why I think if he can get to that point where there is some sort of cap and allow Carolina's recruiting to get back to the point that it was when he, was thriving here the most, 2020, 2021, 2022 classes, then I think he'll be satisfied with that. Speaking of some of the other stuff that he talked about, one thing that he was really excited about, he's been talking about this for a while, is the fact that they can have analysts on the field, and it will benefit the staff and the players to have some of these other guys in there. I've been saying this for a long time. I mean, I think the two most impactful ones for this season, Clyde Christensen being able to work on the field with the quarterbacks, guy that, did so much for Tom Brady and has worked with multiple successful quarterbacks at the NFL level. Now having him there to coach these quarterbacks along is going to be huge. And then I think Jimmy Lindsey along the defensive line is going to be massive. A guy that was the defensive line coach for years at LSU. He's been to other places in the SEC. He has produced some amazing players along the defensive line. Combining him with Ted Monachino is going to be huge. And it's also a great opportunity for some of these quality control guys. And even a guy like Tylee Kraft, who's now going to be a part of the staff, he's going to have a hands-on, on-the-field role as a player coach. That's going to be really cool to see.
Yeah, no, the benefit of this for Carolina is you have really high-level quality analysts that weren't allowed to be on the field coaching. And, yes, it was great when Mac Brown made the hires, but, they make their biggest impact when they can actually coach. That hasn't been the case. Now they can. And you're putting even more, whether it's NFL talent or NFL experience or high-level college football experience on your coaching field. And it's just adding to the resources that these players have. And I think in one way, it maybe puts more pressure on these guys to perform. But in another way, I think it shows Carolina's commitment, because not every program can boast that they've got those types of guys being analysts and are willing to not make the money that a coordinator makes or a position coach makes just to be an analyst, but they can be on the field coaching. And so I think it's a good thing for Carolina, because that's where Mac Brown's relationships in this game have really, it really shows up on his staff, because you usually hire someone that he's familiar with. And now you're bringing in dudes with a ton of NFL experience and a ton of SEC experience. That can only help your program. And I think if you see improved play from the defensive line, yes, I know Monachino moved to that defensive line coach role, but having that analyst on the field as well, I think will also play a part in that, because you just have more knowledge that can actually do on-field coaching. And I think Carolina will benefit from that in a big way.
Yeah, and speaking of the defensive side of the ball, one of the other things that Mac Brown was really excited about, and this is probably the most excited I've seen him about a position room in a long time, was really the two deep at safety for sure. But I thought it was the whole secondary just in general. Raved about Elijah Huzzy being able to move back to the outside. We heard so much about him last offseason out there and how good he was looking. But then, of course, he ends up having to move into the nickel because of the injury to DeAndre Boykins. But, he also, he raved I don't even think a strong enough word for what he was talking about Marcus Allen. He said that he was pretty. And had a smile on his face doing it. So, he loves everything that he's seen from him. Marcus Allen has gained weight, which I think is huge because he pointed out he did look rather thin on the outside at times last year. And that was part of the issue that he had, was that he just wasn't able to handle physicality well enough. I think this year he'll be better positioned to do that. Also, hopefully they will have a little bit better depth behind him. I know that, again, as he did in the spring, Mac Brown brought up Tyrone Stewart and said that he's a guy that looked really good in the first practice, and he's a guy that he thinks is going to be able to play some this year for Carolina on the outside. Then you get to the safety spot where Stick Lane, I think, is guaranteed to be a starter. When you do what he did last year while only starting a handful of games, it's almost impossible to keep that dude off the field for a significant amount of reps. But, you're talking about Jakeem Harris, who could be the starter at field safety. Not 100% sure about that, because you've got Will Hardy, who's taken a step supposedly this spring, and they've really liked the work that he's been putting in the offseason. And you've got DeAndre Boykins, who I thought all along they needed to make this move, especially I thought they should have done it last offseason. They were going to have him play the nickel again. He's going to be at safety, which I think utilizes his strengths a little bit better. This secondary is incredibly deep, and especially that safety spot, which really, frankly, just has not been great. Probably since his first year when they had the two Miles back there, Miles Dorn and Miles Wolfel.
Yeah, no. It was something that it stood out to me when I was going through the press conference as well, was the way he glowed up when talking about the safety. He said that, it's as good as a two-deep room as he's had since he's gotten back here. When he raved about Marcus Allen, that just made me excited because everyone knows that's my guy. I've loved him since he came on the scene 2 years ago. We know what we know what Elijah Huzzy brings to the table, and what he's capable of doing as a guy that can make plays on the football, and then when he gets his hands on the football, take it the other way and put the ball in the end zone. So, but you look at the safety position. The safety position, I think, in the modern game, it's changed. 10 years ago, if you didn't have a dynamic safety, it really limited your defense. It felt like you had to have a guy that could really change the game one way or the other. The game's kind of shifted now because you play with so many, you're so many nickel and dime packages that you've got a lot of defensive backs on the field. But the biggest thing he talked about was those guys got to tackle in space because they get put in space a lot. And he feels as confident as he's been since he's gotten back here that's going to happen. And that's a big thing because, I think one of the things I said a lot about under Gene Chizik was, for the most part, he put guys in position to make plays, and they just didn't make plays for whatever reason. Jay Bateman, it felt like that guy was in over his head. Once he got to the Power 5 level, that scheme, the way he tried to run his defense, didn't transition well from being able to do it with Army, where his defense was on the field 22 minutes a game. I think we know Jeff Collins as a coordinator is legit. We've talked about, Kamen Rucker and the guys talked last week about the standard that he set since he arrived, which is something that the previous defensive coordinators haven't done. And I think with those safeties, like if they're not making tackles, you're going to take you out of the game, and they can actually go to someone else, which hasn't been the case. And so it's going to be interesting to see who ends up starting there. But no matter what, you should feel confident that Carolina has 4 guys in their safety room that will contribute and help this defense on a game-in, game-out basis. And that's a big thing because we haven't had that in what feels like quite some time.
Yeah, and look, you said that, the safety position has changed. For Carolina, it's really not changed that much in terms of their importance. They are incredibly important because, especially in the run game, your defensive front can't stop the run. So you need safeties that are aggressive, that are willing to come downhill and make plays. And it just feels like the last few years, they haven't had that type of guy. They had that guy last year in Stick Lane, but because he arrived late and he enrolled in the summer, they didn't really give him a chance until midway through the year. He should have been starting the whole season. I know that he was learning a new defense or whatever, but they needed a guy that could come up and make plays in the run game. And they never had that guy. Like Don Chapman was just that wasn't the type of player that he was. He should have been probably a nickel corner the entire time that he was there, but they had to play him out of position. Now you got guys that fit the safety position to a T, and it's going to allow you, I think, to be much more successful than you've been the last few years. Another area that, you're hoping that you've got some pretty good depth at is the offensive line. And look, I thought it was really interesting that the group that was out there last night, pretty much the entire time, or the other night, I should say, was the first team line that we saw back in the spring. It was from left to right, Howard Sampson, Malik McGowan, Austin Blaschke, Willie Lampkin, and Trevion Green. Then you had Ja'Kiah Leftwich. They used him at both left tackle and right tackle. Again, they're hoping that he can push Trevion Green. Me personally, I'm not. I think I want him as a more versatile option off the bench that can rotate in if needed. But I've seen what he's done in the ACC before, and I still question that and would like to get a look at what Trevion Green can do if he can stay healthy. But having him as a versatile option back there, especially with Green's injury history, is certainly helpful. Then you had Zach Greenberg, the Division III transfer, who came up. They're using him at center. So that could be huge, where if there was an injury to Austin Blaschke, or if he really just struggles that much, they have a guy that can play there and would keep Willie Lampkin at the spot where they really need him at that right guard spot. So that was huge. Mac Brown said he looked really good in his first practice. So you like to hear that. And then, Aiden Banfield's name came up again, and Mac Brown was pretty emphatic on the fact that he is going to play at some point this year as a true freshman on the interior of that offensive line. So, great. I mean, for him, that's amazing to be able to hear your head coach talking about you already. That is tremendous praise for a guy that was, barely ranked inside of the top 1,000 in his class coming out of high school. But it makes sense when you think about, what I said, watching his film and everything like that. So those are 8 guys right there. And then we heard Zach Rice sort of started putting things together a little bit in spring practice. So maybe he's that 9th guy. Maybe Jonathan Adorno finally hits, and he's a guy that can be that 9th guy. I mean, I know they've talked about it before, and it feels like every year they try to point to guys and say, oh, this is the year where they're going to have that depth. But when you look at it, I feel like this is probably the year where you can actually feel confident that at least right now, I would say at least they have 7, if not 8 already, and it could grow to 9 along that offensive front, which is what they desperately need, depth.
Yep, and I think as much as anything since Mac Brown got back, he's talked about building up that unit. And it feels like for the first time, there's legitimate depth at that position group. And I think it's something for us to monitor when we get in season is how much are they giving reps to the backup guys, even if the game is close, and trying to keep these guys fresh. We look at the offensive line and the struggles they had at the end of the seasons the last couple of years. Part of it too was like they got worn down. I think is just as much as we talked about defensively, and part of that was because Carolina was playing in close games, so it's kind of hard to take those guys out. Also, I think the other guys just weren't good enough, and I think when you have your offensive line coach come back, I think it matters more than you probably think it does on the surface. Because now you know what he wants, you know what to expect, you know the routines, and all that. But also, I think Carolina's just doing a much better job evaluating talent and then progressing the talent once it gets on campus. And so, if Carolina is legitimately 8 to 9 deep up front, I hope the staff is as aware as they've been about rotating those guys in, getting them in-game reps as well to really build this offensive lineup, because you need 8 to 9 offensive linemen to survive a season, especially now. I know we're not talking about going to the playoff this year, but now you're going to play 15 games in a college football season if you want to play for a championship. You're going to have to be deeper than you've been in years past, and so I'm really encouraged about this, and I'm really excited to see if this translates, because we've heard it a few times from Mac Brown. Really be confident in that group and it not translate in terms of the depth up there. If that's the case this year, I think Carolina's offense, especially because they want to run the football, I think they'll be better later in the seasons than what they've been in years past.
All right. Last thing that I took away from his press conference was he talked about the punter position, and he mentioned Tom McGinnis. Good day for him. The most interesting part, though, was that he, confirmed that he was not good in the spring. That's exactly what he said, which is, that really tells you something. We're not even saying inconsistent. When you just flat out say a guy was not good in the spring, that is as bad of an endorsement as you can possibly get. And look, McGinnis is a guy that, came in last year, was forced into a tough situation and was up and down. He had his moments, but for the most part, really struggled. And I think people were a little panicked when they heard in the spring that he was looking that bad. And Mac Brown said, we went out and were aggressively looking for someone at the punter position in the transfer portal. Now, there were a few guys that I pointed to at one point and said, I think Carolina should be interested in this. So I don't know if they just had their eyes on a big name prize. The one that comes to mind for me is a guy that was an in-state recruit out of high school that went to Notre Dame, Bryce McPherson. Problem with that is he was a scholarship guy, so they would have had to figure out how they would have made that fit. So I guess that may have been the reason why they weren't able to get him. But, that was interesting. Lucas Osada is a guy that I think a lot of people are expecting. If McGinnis was to struggle, then he would be the guy that would step in. He did say Osada struggled a little bit, but first practice, he's another guy that enrolled in the summer, so this was his first practice. It's probably going to take him a little bit of time as well. They desperately need McGinnis to be better to start the year, though, because, that first game, it's going to be important. Special teams could be what decides that game, especially with how ugly some of these season openers can look. And with the questions that you have about your offense, I think you need special teams to be an area that you can rely on. I hope this is the turning point for Tom McGinnis, and the fact that he came out and started fall camp well, that gives him, a little bit of an ego boost, and maybe that allows him to step up. But man, it when you hear your head coach be that honest about how bad it was, it does kind of scare you a little bit.
Yeah, look, I'd love to sit here and think we're not going to need to punt, but that's just not the reality of the situation. And you're right that opener on the road at Minnesota, you could be playing a field position battle in that second half, and that's how you're trying to win the game. And Mac Brown spoke, I think, it felt like for about 5 minutes about the importance of special teams and how he was telling them, if you don't want to play special teams, go do something else, because it's 1/3 of the game. And you look at some of the games that Carolina's lost and that they shouldn't have lost. Special teams has played a role in that. And you look at, and so if you clean that area up, maybe you win. Maybe you don't lose 4 straight at the end of the season 2 years ago. Maybe you don't have the issues you had down the stretch last season. And we're talking about there's a different narrative around the program. And so hopefully, I'm with you. Hopefully McGinnis kind of builds off of his start to it, takes the bull by the horns, and becomes the punter we need him to be, because there's going to be games where we're going to need him to flip the field and give this defense a chance to not get off the field, not give up points. And so I think the fact that Mac Brown was as vocal about it lets you know that, A, he's worried about it, but B, he's also confident he's got the right guys to get the job done.
All right. All right, I'm back here. And, I knew it was going to happen at some point, guys, because my computer had not frozen up in about 2 or 3 episodes. So, I'm jumping on the phone here to wrap it up there. But, again, special teams, incredibly important. Hopefully they get that ironed out. Well, guys, we are running late here, as you can see. So, you know what? I lied to you. We're going to do the running back portion with the wide receivers, with the tight ends. We'll do that tomorrow. So I think that works out great because it still keeps us on the same schedule that we were going to be on. We got so into the ACC, all the preseason ACC polls and this press conference stuff and some of the takeaways from, the video of the first day of camp, I think was incredibly interesting. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to circle back tomorrow and we'll see, if they end up releasing, the all ACC teams. We can react to that for like the first 10 minutes. And then we'll jump into previewing the offensive skill positions for you guys for this season. Opinions on, the running back room, where things stand there, who could be the backup for Carolina, who could surprise. Wide receiver, what does the starting group look like there? Who do we really want to see start with, just a host of guys in that room that look like they're going to be special, not only this season, but moving forward. And then that tight end room, incredibly healthy. I mean, Bryson Nesbitt, by the way, revealing that he was playing on a torn meniscus for the second half of last season. I mean, we got to talk about that. He wasn't the only guy that was banged up last year, so we'll talk about that group being healthy and Jake Johnson joining that group as well. So all of that stuff on tomorrow's edition of the podcast. We'll do it at the same time, 8:30, unless something else changes. So make sure that you're tuning in for that here on these same platforms, the Facebook page and the YouTube page. Also, in the meantime, head over to the website, HeelToughBlog.com. Josh got the article up there today. You can read a little bit more about Carolina being placed 8th in the preseason poll by the ACC media earlier today. We have all the articles up there with all of the position previews that go in depth. That'll be, the in-depth look. It kind of lays out the information for each group, and then you can check out the projected depth chart. That's my opinion on what I think the depth chart will look like when Carolina takes the field for that first game against Minnesota. So make sure you are checking that out. And plenty more coming your way over there on the website side of things as we get closer to the start of the season. Also, basketball-wise, just keep an eye out. There's stuff going on the recruiting trail for the Tar Heels in the 2025 class. And then, of course, it won't be too long before the team is back out there practicing. We have late night, all of that stuff, and we will take you through that as that happens, as the offseason quickly coming to an end for Carolina basketball and another exciting year on deck. Again, each day, make sure you check that website, HeelToughBlog.com, for all of the latest Tar Heel football and Tar Heel basketball news. But for now, that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the podcast. Want to thank Josh for hosting with me. Want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.